Imagine this. You're alone on Navajo Route 36, a stretch of highway swallowed by the desert night. The engine hums steady, your headlights cut through the black, when suddenly your side mirror catches something. A face, not yours, staring back at you from the glass and grinning. Truckers call it the Route 36 stare. Headlights flicker. A figure runs beside your rig, keeping pace no matter how fast you go. The CB radio erupts with static, but in the noise, you swear you hear your own voice whispering back at you. What would you do if the thing outside wore your face? If this already sent a chill down your spine, hit subscribe now. Most won't, and maybe that's why they never finish the drive. Navajo Route 36 cuts through the northern desert of New Mexico. On a map, it looks ordinary. Just another thin line running between 2 points. But when night falls, truckers say the desert swallows the road whole. The horizon disappears and you're left with nothing but black skies, jagged mesas, and sand that seems to stretch forever. The silence out here is unlike any other. Not peaceful, but heavy. Too heavy for the living. Drivers speak of it pressing against their cabins, a silence so complete it feels as though the world itself has stopped breathing. Strange things happen when the wheels hit this stretch. Radios that work fine on other highways suddenly crackle with static. Stations bleed into each other, sometimes with voices no one can trace. CB signals cut out, leaving truckers isolated in the vast dark. Headlights falter, flickering against shadows that move when there's nothing there. Even modern GPS units, satellites locked in orbit above, struggle. Truckers report the same nightmare, watching their screens reroute them back to the same lonely mile of desert, as if the road is looping them into its own design. For those who know the land, these are not accidents. Navajo legends speak of figures that can change shape, slipping between human and animal form, feeding on fear. To the outsider, these tales are dismissed as folklore. But to those who have driven Route 36 at night, they are not stories, they are warnings. One trucker swore he saw footprints stretching across the dust by the roadside. At first they seemed human, though far too large. Then midway across the sand, the prints simply stopped, as if the one leaving them had lifted off the earth itself. He never pulled over again. Out here, the desert hides more than it shows, and every mile brings you closer to what waits beyond the reach of your headlights. It was a little after 2 a.m. when Paul, a long-haul driver with 2 decades of experience, found himself crossing Route 36 under a moonless sky. He had driven this way before, but tonight felt different. The desert seemed to hold its breath. His radio had gone silent, his cell signal had vanished, and only the rhythmic hum of the tires kept him company. He leaned forward, his eyes adjusting to the endless black. The road stretched on without curves, without signs, without life. And then, the headlights caught movement. At first, he thought it was an animal, something darting from the brush, but as his high beam swept across the lane, he saw it more clearly. A figure, human-shaped, running beside his 18-wheeler. Paul checked his speedometer, 70 miles an hour. Yet the figure kept pace, its limbs pumping with unnatural precision, every stride timed to his wheels. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. No one can run that fast, he thought. He forced his eyes back to the road ahead, telling himself it was exhaustion playing tricks. But the figure remained, visible in the edge of his lights, keeping pace like a shadow stitched to his truck. Then it shifted. Without slowing, without stumbling, the figure dropped onto all fours. Its arms bent at unnatural angles, spine arching like an animal, and still, it ran beside him, effortlessly, as though gravity had no claim over it. Paul's pulse hammered in his ears. He flicked his eyes toward the side mirror, desperate to see if it was really there, and that's when his blood froze. The face staring back at him wasn't some stranger's, it was his own. Pale, grinning wide, eyes reflecting the glare of his headlights. He tore his gaze away, heart racing, every instinct screaming at him to accelerate. The truck roared as he pressed the pedal down, speed climbing. For a fleeting second, he thought he'd left it behind. Then the CB radio crackled to life. Static at first, hissing and snapping through the cab. Paul leaned toward the mic, his throat dry, but before he could speak, he heard it. His own voice, whispering through the static. "Don't stop." Every hair on his body stood on end. He yanked the cord free, silencing the radio, but the whisper seemed to hang in the air, echoing in the cab. His chest felt tight, as if the desert itself had pressed in on him, watching, waiting. He didn't stop, not until dawn broke hours later and the first glow of sunlight cut across the mesas. Only then did he risk a glance at the mirror again. The face was gone, but the memory stayed. To this day, Paul refuses to drive Route 36 at night. And when other truckers press him for details, he only says this: "The desert showed me myself, and I don't ever want to see that again." To understand what truckers claim to see along Route 36, you have to understand the land itself and the warnings that were spoken long before the road was ever paved. Among the Navajo people, there is a belief in beings known as skinwalkers. They are not spirits, not ghosts, but men and women who once walked the earth as ordinary people. Witches, they are called, cursed figures who gave up their humanity to gain a darker kind of power. It is said a skinwalker can become any creature it chooses. A wolf, a coyote, an owl, even a person you once loved. They wear the skins of animals, slipping into new shapes the way the desert wind changes direction. And once transformed, they move with impossible speed, faster than any truck, faster than any light can catch. Truckers have described coyotes that rise on two legs, staring with eyes that glimmer like glass in the beams of their headlights. Others swear they've heard laughter echoing across the sands, laughter that began as distant and animal, but twisted mid-breath into something unmistakably human. And then there are the voices, the ones that come when the night is deepest, a call from the brush, from the roadside, from just beyond the glow of the headlights. Sometimes it is the voice of a mother pleading. Sometimes it is the cry of a child, lost and afraid. And sometimes it is your own voice, beckoning you to stop. But those who stop rarely tell their stories afterward. To the Navajo, these tales are not campfire stories or myths for children. They are warnings passed down through generations. Never wander the desert at night. Never answer voices that come from the darkness. And above all, never lock eyes with the thing wearing your face. The desert, they say, remembers. And those who mock its warnings often don't come back the same. So ask yourself, if you were on this road alone, and your reflection suddenly smiled back at you from the glass, would you trust it? Or would you drive faster into the dark, praying the desert forgets your name? Elena was no rookie to the highways. She'd driven rigs across every stretch of the American desert, from the California coast to the plains of Texas. But on one night along Route 36, she learned why even veteran truckers whisper about this road. It was past midnight when exhaustion hit. She spotted a rest stop, a small pull-in, no lights, no cars, long since abandoned. She told herself it would be just a few minutes. Park, close her eyes, and let the hum of the engine settle her nerves. The moment she shut down the rig, the silence struck her. It wasn't the kind of silence she knew from remote highways. This was thicker, pressing, as though every sound of the world had been swallowed whole. She cracked her window slightly, hoping for the whistle of desert wind, but heard nothing. And then tap. A sharp, deliberate tap against the glass beside her. Her heart thudded once, hard. She froze, listening. Then it came again. Tap, tap, just inches from her face. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Reflected in the glass was herself. Not the tired, wary woman sitting in the cab, but another Elena, standing outside the truck, skin pale, lips moving silently, eyes fixed on her own. She watched, paralyzed, as the reflection mouthed words she couldn't hear. The movements were too slow, too deliberate, like someone imitating human speech. She strained to make sense of it, but nothing reached her ears, only the unbearable silence of the desert pressing in. She snapped her head toward the window, desperate to see what was truly there. Nothing, just the black stretch of sand and the faint outline of the mesas under the stars. But when she looked back at the glass, the other Elena was gone. She gripped the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe. It was then she noticed them, wet footprints smeared along the pavement just below her door. Fresh, leading away into the dark. No sound, no sign of life, just prints that hadn't been there moments before. Elena fired up the engine, pulled onto the highway, and didn't look back. To this day, she refuses to park anywhere near Road 36, telling others simply, "Sometimes the face in the glass isn't yours. It's something waiting to take your place." If you think you could ignore a face like that staring at you, subscribe now. Otherwise, tell us in the comments. What would you do if the reflection in your window wasn't you? Elena's experience wasn't isolated. Truckers across decades have spoken of moments on Route 36 that defy explanation. Small glimpses, brief, chilling flashes that last only seconds but leave marks they never forget. One driver described passing through a barren stretch just past the mesas when his high beam swept over the roadside brush. He expected rabbits or coyotes startled by the light. Instead, he saw three figures crouched low, motionless, watching. Their eyes glowed unnaturally, yellow, like burning embers, unblinking. He slowed for only a moment, but in that instant, the figures sank lower into the sand, as though melting into the earth itself. When he stopped to check, nothing was there. No prints, no movement, only the memory of those eyes. Another trucker swore he saw a coyote in the middle of the lane. At first, it stood still, caught in his headlights. Then, slowly, it rose up, balanced awkwardly but deliberately on two legs. It stood there, long enough for him to register that what he was seeing was wrong. Its head cocked, its mouth curling into what looked disturbingly like a smile. And just as his rig approached, it dropped back down and darted into the desert, vanishing into the night. He said he nearly drove off the road from the shock. And then there are the handprints. Drivers have reported pulling over briefly, only to climb back into their cabs and find smeared prints on the trailer doors. Too high to belong to children, too distorted to be human. Some were elongated, with fingers stretched far beyond normal length. One man described them as hands that looked like they were reaching through the metal, not pressed against it. He swore he could feel a chill radiating from the trailer wall long after he drove away. Individually, these stories sound like fragments of nightmares, brief flashes of fear under the weight of exhaustion. But stacked together, they create a pattern. Figures in the brush, animals walking upright, handprints where no hand should have reached, each moment brief, each one unexplained, each one leaving the driver with the same thought. Route 36 isn't just a road, it's a stage, and something is always watching, waiting for its next scene. Not far from the center of Route 36 sits a gas station that hasn't been open in years. Its signs are faded, its lights long gone dark. Locals say it shut down after a series of unexplained accidents, though the building still stands, leaning, silent, a relic of something that should have been forgotten. But some truckers, running on fumes with no other option, have tried to stop there, and what they describe is enough to keep others away for good. One driver recalled pulling in, convinced he could at least rest in the lot. The pumps were rusted, cables hanging, no power lines feeding the station. And yet, as soon as he stepped out of his cab, one pump shuddered. The handle lifted slightly, and the old meter clicked as if fuel was ready to flow. He froze, keys in hand. Then, without him touching it, the pump lever snapped down. A hollow, metallic clank echoed in the night. He swore he heard fuel rushing, even though the tank beneath his rig remained sealed. Shaken, he climbed back into his cab, locking the door, trying to convince himself it was just the wind. That's when he looked up and saw the station's glass window across the lot. Behind the cracked pane, a reflection stared back at him. His own body, still standing outside the truck, one hand resting on the pump handle, the other waving slowly as though mocking him. He blinked, heart racing, and looked down at himself. He was seated firmly in the cab, but the reflection remained, its grin widening, its arm jerking in that same mechanical wave. Panic set in. He fired the engine and pulled away, gravel crunching under his tires. The station grew smaller in his mirrors, swallowed by darkness. Relief began to creep in until he saw it. The reflection, running beside the trailer, keeping pace effortlessly, the way no man should. Its form flickered in and out of his headlights, as if the glass from the gas station had come alive, chasing him down the highway. He didn't stop, not until he reached a populated town miles away. And when other drivers asked why he looked pale, why his hands trembled even after hours off the road, he told them one thing: if you see that station, don't stop, not even for a second. To this day, many truckers refuse to fuel anywhere near Route 36. Some won't even drive past the abandoned pumps in daylight. They say the glass there doesn't just show your reflection. It shows what wants to replace you. If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. Don't just watch in silence. Subscribe now, or you might end up alone on Route 36 with them. Of all the stories tied to Route 36, none are more unsettling than the vanishings. Every highway has accidents. Every desert road has its share of drivers who don't make it home. But what happens here is different. On this stretch, rigs have been found idling on the shoulder, engines running, headlights burning through the dark, trailers still locked, freight untouched, but the drivers gone. One search team found a truck at dawn, parked half a mile off the main road. The cab door was wide open, swaying lightly in the desert wind. Inside, nothing was disturbed. Wallets, phones, and logbooks left behind. The seat was still warm, as though the driver had just stepped out, but there was no trace of him anywhere in the sand around the truck. No footprints, no tire tracks, only silence. Another rig was discovered with its radio still humming. Not music, not static, but a voice, low and steady, repeating what sounded like a chant. Investigators later claimed it was Navajo, though no one could identify the exact words. When they cut the power to the radio, the voice continued for a few seconds longer, before fading into static. And then there were the claw marks. One driver's rig was found near an empty turnout. Along the trailer wall, gouges stretched from top to bottom, carved deep into the metal. Each mark ran parallel, as though something had pressed both hands against the steel and dragged itself along the length of the truck. When the searchers followed the direction of the marks into the desert, they found impressions in the dust, shapes that might have been footprints, except they were too long, too narrow, almost animal, but not quite. The trail led several yards into the brush, and then stopped cold, as if whatever left them had vanished into thin air. Families have begged for answers. Police reports mark these cases as disappearances, with no foul play confirmed. But truckers on the route know better. They whisper that these aren't accidents, and these aren't simple vanishings. They say the desert takes what it wants, that sometimes what walks beside you in the dark doesn't just stare, it follows. And when the time comes, it takes you with it. So I'll ask you, what do you believe? Do you think these drivers fled into the desert, abandoning their rigs and their lives, or were they taken by something far older than the road itself? One of the most disturbing accounts from Route 36 comes from a driver who agreed to share his story only once. He asked that his name never be published, but other truckers know him well, and they know he hasn't driven the route again since that night. He was hauling westbound, the road empty, the desert stretching endlessly around him. The night was thick, moonless, the kind of black that swallowed the beam of his high beams within yards. Fatigue was setting in, and every mile felt heavier than the last. That's when he heard it, a voice. At first faint, muffled like something carried on the wind. He ignored it. Desert winds carry all kinds of illusions, he told himself. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. A child's voice. Daddy! His chest tightened. He knew that voice. It was his daughter's. She was hundreds of miles away at home, safe in bed, but the sound of her calling cut through the silence like a knife. Daddy, please, stop. He gripped the wheel harder, eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look. But then he heard footsteps outside the cab, light at first, then heavier, as though several figures were running alongside the truck. He risked a glance at the mirrors. Shapes, dozens of them. Keeping pace, their bodies moving in jerks, pounding against the sides of the trailer with hollow thuds. Then came the voice again, this time from directly outside his window. His daughter's voice, desperate, pleading. Please, Daddy, don't leave me here. Against every instinct, he turned his head. And what he saw nearly made him lose control of the rig. One of the figures was right beside his cab. Its body flickered in and out of the headlights, skin stretched too thin, movements too sharp. But its face was hers, his little girl's, smiling. He tore his eyes back to the road, forcing the truck faster, praying for dawn. That's when the CB radio exploded with so loud it shook the cabin. For a moment, nothing but white noise filled the air. Then, through the hiss, a voice broke through. Not his daughter's this time. Something deeper, commanding. Drive. Don't look back. He listened. He didn't dare do anything else. The figures pounded harder, thuds echoing like fists on hollow metal, but he never took his eyes off the road. He drove until the sky bled gray with the first light of morning. When he finally pulled over at a lot in the next town, his body still trembling, he walked around his trailer, and what he found left him shaking worse than before. Along the length of the trailer were claw marks, dozens of them. Long, jagged, running parallel to each other from front to back, deep enough to cut through paint and score into the metal beneath. He doesn't speak of what happened now. When pressed, he only says this: "Something out there wanted me to stop, and if I had, I'd never have made it out." Even today, the marks on that trailer remain, silent testimony to what waits in the dark on Route 36. After decades of stories, countless whispered warnings, and testimonies from drivers who will never set foot on that road again, one truth remains: Route 36 does not forgive curiosity. Truckers who survive speak of a lesson written in fear. Mirrors out here don't always belong to you. Sometimes they show what's waiting for you. A shadow pacing your headlights, a smile that isn't yours, a voice calling from the dark begging you to stop. And that is why, even in daylight, Navajo Route 36 carries its reputation. Not as a highway, but as a hunting ground. Some drivers refuse to speak of it at all. Others leave behind warnings, hoping someone else will listen. But one piece of evidence has surfaced, a dash cam recording from a driver who vanished shortly after. The footage begins like any other night run, the hum of the engine, headlights cutting through the desert, and then a figure appears at the edge of the frame, running beside the truck. Its stride perfect, measured, never slowing. The camera jolts as the driver accelerates, but the figure keeps pace. And when the lights catch its face, it isn't a stranger, it's his own, staring back at him, grinning wide before the frame cuts to black. The footage ends there. The driver was never seen again. So the question remains, when you drive through the desert, when you glance into the glass beside you, are you looking at yourself or at something waiting to take your place? If you watch to the end and don't subscribe, just remember, the next time you check your mirror, you may not like what's looking back.